So the number one thing when trying to care for people is really trying to help them create behaviors that are lasting, right? Ultimately, we want to help people to be able to be self-sufficient so that they can take care of themselves. And we do that through educating them and providing them with the knowledge needed to make informed decisions and to practice proper behaviors. One thing to understand about behaviors is that a behavior is simply a response to an internal and external condition, right? Something happens and we are responding to it. And when we remember back to the social determinants of health, the things that actually influence people's health, we have modifiable determinants of health and non-modifiable determinants of health. Non-modifiable determinants of health, those are things that we can't change. Those are things like our genetics, our family history. Those things, we can't change them, but what we can do is we can manage them. But we do have those modifiable things that can be changed. And the number one modifiable thing that we all have control over is our behavior. How we respond to situations, what we do, etc. We all have control over those things. But and truth is, even though we have control, our behavior is definitely influenced by the world around us, by society, right? Because our behavior is a response to external conditions. For example, if you live in a community that has no food within a 1 mile radius that has nutritional value, aka you live in a food desert, then you are pretty much forced to have to eat junk food, especially if you don't have like transportation, you don't have the means to pay the higher prices, etc. You are almost forced to eat unhealthy foods because of where you live. So our behavior definitely much is influenced by the society around us. So our behavior is influenced by our cultural, social, economic, and environmental factors, right? Those all form or shape our behavior as a whole. And there's common negative behaviors that most people partake in, or when we think about what negative behaviors are, some of the most common ones are tobacco smoking, physical inactivity, poor dietary habit, excessive alcohol consumption, poor sleep hygiene, excessive screen time, chronic stress and overthinking, neglecting preventative health care, substance abuse, as well as unsafe sexual practices. And it's important that CHWs understand what negative behaviors their community participate in or do. Also, CHWs need to understand how they can change those behaviors, and they are able to create those change by utilizing behavioral change strategies. And the behavior strategies will empower, support, and create lasting health improvements within those communities that CHWs are trying to improve. Behavioral change strategies allow CHW to promote health and prevention, enhance communication, right? Being able to tailor efforts to specific population or to specific individuals allows them to um, become motivated to change the community or the individual that the CHW is trying to support. Also, too, behavioral change strategies allow CHWs to address barriers as well, because once again, sometimes people's behavior is not solely due to them; it's also due to influence. Right? They're responding to external stimuli, external things, and so CHWs are able to recognize that and able to address things like the social, economic, and environmental factors that are influencing or causing a person to behave the way they're behaving. It also helps the CHW to build trust and as well as cultural relevance, right? Understanding behavior change prevents blaming and fosters culturally appropriate support. It also empowers the clients, right? Because at the end of the day, we want the clients to be able to make informed decisions. So by us understanding or CHWs understanding what negative behaviors that person or community is doing, CHWs are able to provide them with information so that they can take control of their own behavioral decisions and ultimately become self-sufficient. It also supports long-term change as well. and also strengthens public health impact also. So when you think about as a whole, what exactly are behavioral change models? And so behavioral change models are evidence-based frameworks slash models used to understand, predict, and influence individuals' health and behaviors. Um, there's a bunch of models out there that potentially can be used, but in this class, we're actually only going to focus on three of the behavioral change models. We're going to focus on the health belief model, social cognitive model, and the trans theoretical model. Understand about each of these models to understand what exactly they do and what can they be used for. You really need to pay attention to the title. For example, the health belief model, really what it talks about is how people's beliefs about a disorder or their ability to change their health impacts their decisions. So one of the barriers that CHWs will have to do is try to figure out how can we change the way people think about their health, and also how do we get people to understand or create motivations in order to change their health as well. The social cognitive model, cognitive means thinking. So understanding how society impacts people's thoughts, which our thoughts impact our behavior. And because we're citizens of society, our behavior also impacts society. And then the trans theoretical model, this one might be a little bit more challenging, but when we break down the word, we have trans and then we have theoretical. So trans is like transitioning, and theoretical are theories or stages. So you might also hear this called the stages of change. So what it talks about is how people transition from not thinking at all from behavioral change to their behavior just becoming a part of who they are. So the first one up is the health belief model. And really what the health belief model does is focus on um, how do we get people to change the way they think about health, and also get people to a point where their beliefs are driving their actions. Usually what happens is people don't want to change their behavior because of misconceptions that they may have. So, for example, the first thing when it comes to the health belief model is changing people's perception of seriousness of the health problem. So some people may understand that there's health issues, health problems, or diseases, but they may not think it's not that big of a deal. They may think that people are exaggerating it. It's not a big deal at all. We also have perceived susceptibility, meaning that people believe that they can't get it, right? They may, oh, that doesn't happen to people like me. Oh, I'm invincible, right? That's the perceived susceptibility. Then we have perceived benefit. For some people, they may not see a benefit of actually taking action, right? They may not actually see it worth their while to actually take care of their health or take actions in order to not get something or to put in the work to get better. They also may see perceived barriers, so meaning um, that they may think it's too hard to do something, or maybe they're like, oh well, I can't go walking every day. That's just too much work. I can't diet. It's so complicated to figure out what's the right thing to eat, etc. So we have to change the way they think about those barriers, and we have to be able to help them overcome those barriers. Also, too, when you think of cues of action, most of the time, in order to create behavioral change, it really helps out when you have a support system. So, cues of action is someone either checking up on someone, saying, "Hey, how's your diet going? How's your journey going, etc." Or it could be simply as when someone's looking at social media or a billboard and it's seeing something like "Change your life today," "Don't do this behavior," etc. And it really helps people to stay motivated, to stay on task, and also a calls to action is really calling them to make a change in their lives. And so usually when it comes to cues to action, it's really important to surround yourself with people who are supportive of this behavioral change. And then self-efficacy. A lot of times it's really challenging to change your behavior or a client to change their behavior if they don't believe that they can do it. So self-efficacy is all about belief in your capability. And then self-esteem is all about belief in yourself. So if someone doesn't believe they can do something, right, it really would be challenging for them to stay motivated or even to start or to do it altogether. So when we look at when we just break it down again, the health belief model, we're looking at the perceived seriousness of the health problem, really changing people of how people think about the seriousness of the health problem. We want to help them understand that this is serious. You need to take it serious. Also, too, we have to get people to understand that they can be susceptible, right? You can be at risk, right? When you compare it to COVID-19, a lot of people thought COVID was fake, right? So therefore, they didn't perceive the seriousness. A lot of people also were thinking like, well, I can't catch it. I don't ever get sick, right? So then they didn't believe that they were at risk of actually getting COVID. And then perceived benefit of it, a lot of people are like, well, I can't take time off work to go to the doctor, or that's just too much money. I just can't do that. But so we have to get them to understand that you can do those things. There are resources out there for you to do it. Whatever excuse you have, we can find a solution. Also, too, looking at the cues of actions as well is, a lot of times cues of actions could be simply the symptoms, right? But a lot of times when we talk about prevention, we don't want symptoms to happen. We don't want to be reactionary to care. We want to make sure that we are proactive. And part of that proactive thing is working ourselves, like really pushing ourselves to get it done. And then making sure that we are surrounding ourselves with people who will support us, who will be checking on us, etc. And then self-efficacy is the confidence in your own ability to make that change, whatever that change might be. Then we have the social cognitive model. The social cognitive model, I always say throw up your triangle when you're talking about the social cognitive model, because really what it focuses on is how society impacts our thoughts, which impacts our behaviors, and then our behaviors impact society. It also speaks about how people tend to learn through observational learning and social interaction. So depending on where you are, right, your culture, the society, the community you live in, all those things you are learning from. You are learning how to behave, what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what isn't appropriate, ways to survive, ways to communicate with people, etc. All those things are learned behaviors that are done through observational learning. You're observing your surrounding, and that's how you learn. And that's similar to how babies learn, right? Babies are observing. And as adults, we do the same thing. As we get older, we continue to do the same thing. We observe, and that's really and that's how we learn. So society is impacting our thoughts like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay. So boom, my behavior is going to be that's what I do. Um, and then here's the triangle. I know it says personal behavior, environment, but really it's how the environment or society is impacting our personal, which are our thoughts, which ultimately impacts our behavior. And then it comes a cycle. We don't live um, we don't live just like by ourselves, right? In society, we live among society. So things reciprocate, meaning that what society does to us, we also give back to society as well. And also a part of this, in addition to the observational learning, right, learning from other people, we also have self-efficacy, right, the belief in your capability to do something. That's really important when it comes to behavioral change. Also, too, society is also reinforcing our behaviors as well, right? So when we do something bad, what happens? You go to jail, or society reprimands you some type of way, gives you a crazy, like a really bad look or something along those lines, and you're like, oh no, I shouldn't have did that, right? So and then when you are doing something good, you get congratulations, yay, good for you. So it's reinforcing our behaviors as well. So that's the social cognitive model. I mean, one of the biggest things I always say when a social cognitive model, birds of the feather flock together. So depending on who you surround yourself with, it could impact you greatly. And lastly is the trans-theoretical model. Um, you're transitioning through multiple stages, so that's why they call it the stages of change. And so one of the things to understand about the trans-theoretical model is really how do people go from this not thinking at all to change their behavior to all of a sudden changing their behavior. And so the word contemplation means thinking. So when we talk about so the first stage of the trans-theoretical model is pre-contemplation, not thinking about changing your behavior whatsoever. You're out here just living your best life, just doing you, whatever that behavior is, not thinking about changing. And then maybe something happened, maybe someone said something, and you're like, oh, maybe I should change my behavior. Am I the problem? Right? You start thinking about those things. And then, so at that point, when you start thinking about changing your behavior, you're in the contemplation phase. So, pre contemplation, not thinking about changing your behavior at all. Contemplation, you are actually thinking about changing your behavior. Then, before you make any great changes in your life, before you decide to follow a program or something, you always should do research, right? You always want to do an evidence based practice when you do try to change your behavior. And in that research, is that phase is called preparation. Preparation, after you start thinking about it, now you go do your research. And sometimes the research is formal, where you're actually going online, you're finding credible resources, and you're actually um, using scientific information in order to drive your decisions. But also sometimes you may go ask a friend or ask a family member or go talk to a professor and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about it? And then they're like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, I tried that myself, right? That's all a part of the preparation phase. Because remember, when preparation meets opportunity, there's an explosion of success. So you need to prepare before you can successfully have that behavioral change. So preparation is a very key step. So then, of course, after you prepare, you got your plan down, you probably made some SMART goals. Now you move on to the action phase where now you're actually doing what you said you were going to do. And so you're going along, everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, usually what happens is when we first start something, everything is great. 1 or 2 weeks down, no problem. Then all of a sudden, our motivation begins to drop. And we call that the maintenance phase. When all of a sudden you feel like you're on the struggle bus, you can't keep going, you're struggling to keep the motivation. You might skip some days practicing your behavior. You might be slipping a little bit, doing back to old behaviors, or maybe you're tempted to go back to old behaviors. That's all the maintenance phase. And during the maintenance phase is really when you have to dig deep and try to find your motivation again, to push yourself to continue along the path. And if you could survive the maintenance phase, then eventually you wake up one day and it's no longer a struggle. It's just who you are, right? This is what you do. And so we call that the termination phase. That phase is the phase where you have turned a behavior that you once were not practicing or wanted to change to now into a positive behavior, or you're no longer doing that behavior. And that's just what you do. You're no longer working or actively to change that behavior. Now, some people would assume that you would go through this in a really smooth style, and the truth of the matter is, you don't. It's really hard to go all the way from not thinking about something, then boom, I'm doing it all of a sudden. It's just who I am. It takes time. It takes effort. And a part of the process is relapsing. And most of the time, people think relapsing when it just comes to addiction, where someone is addicted to a drug, they go to rehab, they come out, everything's fine, and they go back to I'm doing the drugs, and they got to go back to rehab. So normally you call that a relapse, but if you think about it, there's plenty of things that on an everyday you may have relapse. How many times have you started something and then stopped it, and then started it and then stopped it? That's all relapsing. And you need to understand that relapse is a natural part of the process when it comes to behavioral change. People are going to relapse, right? But the goal is that the time frame and the amount of relapse becomes like the amount of time of actually practicing and doing the behavior becomes longer and longer and longer between each relapse. Because the goal is eventually someone's like, all right, this is my last go. I'm gonna do it this time, and eventually they just end up doing it, right? And this just becomes who they are. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to get people to, is to actually taking and to actually change their behavior so that becomes a lifestyle. This is just who they are, the way they are. And so relapse is going to happen. It is natural. We don't want relapse to happen, but if it does happen, we may have to go back and we might have to go reevaluate and back to the preparation phase and really come up with a solid plan so that this doesn't happen again. So that's something we have to understand because it doesn't someone could be going through it so nicely and then life happens and then they relapse. So we have to be prepared for that phase as well. And those are the three behavioral change models that we're going to be discussing here in this class.